Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and in each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research and their experiences. So put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show podcast. My guest for this episode was Dr. Mike Ward from Swansea University. In the first part of this show, I talked to Mike about his previous research on the issue of masculinity. And in the second part of the show, I talked to Mike about his current project, the Coronavirus Diaries. You may have read about this on the BBC website. I will add the link. But this is a really important piece of research documenting the lives and times of what people are living at the moment. Mike has been collecting evidence of people's lives during this pandemic, the youngest aged 10, all the way up to the eldest, aged 87, and he's still looking for volunteers, particularly males who'd like to take part, if they have any documentation of what their lives are like in these strange and unprecedented times. So without further ado, let's go over to the interview. Okay, thank you very much for talking to the podcast. Would you like to start by introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Michael Ward from Swansea University, and I'm a sociologist. And most of my work is centered around men and masculinities, social class, social inequality, and I'm a qualitative researcher who uses an awful lot of ethnographic research.
Great, thanks, Mike. And what's your history in sociology? Where did it all start for you?
Well, for me, just like lots of sociologists, it's about my own biography. So I kind of grew up in a working class background, working class town, but I was a kind of a working class boy, I guess, who was into all sorts of different things, into sports, into reading, into writing. I didn't do particularly well in school, but I always kind of felt that there was more things out there for me. And as I got older, I got into drinking and hanging out in different situations, which obviously weren't always conducive to doing work. And I decided that I needed to go to university just because I wanted to go outside Wales. I wanted to leave South Wales, where I'm from. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something which was interesting with people. My grandfathers were coal miners, so there was an awful lot of talk in the households about trade unions. My mother and father, who by the time I decided to go to university, were divorced, but they were also public servants, I guess. So they were involved in trade unions. Politics was always talked about in the family. So I knew that I kind of had to do something with all that. I didn't know what that was. I got to my A-levels. I did history, English, literature, and geography. And I always tell my students this. I did very, very badly. And I scraped 3Ds. Now, at the time, we're talking 2001. Yeah. So the university landscape was slightly different to what it is now. I deferred entry for a year so I could get a place at a university in Bristol, University West of England, which was where my sociological imagination was born, really.
Yeah.
There's a couple of people there who are still working there now, Dr. Dave Green, okay. Who helped shape my thoughts today. And it'll be 20 years next year that I started this journey. And if it wasn't for Dave and other people like Maeve Landman, Bill Hill, none of who probably are well known because their teaching came first and their publications were slightly in a sort of different era, I guess, where university lecturers in some universities didn't always feel that pressure to publish or just didn't have the opportunities. But without people like Dave and Maeve and Bill and some other people there, Arthur Baxter, who was a sociology of education person, but without them, I wouldn't be here today. So it was those 3 years which really grounded me.
So you mentioned some of your lectures there as well. Was there a particular theory or sociologist you learned about what really kind of piqued your interest when you did your degree?
Well, I did a wonderful module in my second year called Gender. And I can't quite remember who taught me that module.
Right.
So that person, I assume it was a woman because there's not many men teach gender studies. So I can't remember who taught me that module, but the content itself it just really helped me think about who I was as a man. And as a working class man coming from a community where doing anything sort of academic was seen as a bit girly or a bit feminine or something that not real men did. A working class community which was built around heavy industry, built around coal mining or other manual occupations, steel work. But that idea that to be a real man, you really had to be kind of tough and into sports and into heterosexual sex and into anything really that made you look tough and hard. And if you weren't tough and hard, it was kind of seen as a question about your masculinity. So this module on gender really opened that up for me. And it was the work of Raewyn Connell, who is one of the preeminent masculinity scholars in the world. And she, her ideas around masculinity and lots of other people who were writing at the time that we discovered on that module really sort of helped me think about, well, there's multiple ways to be a man. Okay, yeah, tough, strong is just one part of that. And there's lots of ways to identify as a person, and that was really interesting because I'd never really thought of that before. Or maybe if I had, I didn't have the vocabulary to put it into practice. So that for me was important. Obviously, we had the founding scholars, the founding fathers of sociology, which came through. Marx, Weber, Durkheim, obviously. And in my own teaching, I teach a bit of that, but I've also started to teach about the founding mothers or the founding female scholars of sociology, which was missing. So it's really important that we kind of think about that. But the gender stuff really opened my eyes to a different world that I hadn't really had a vocabulary for before.
And you mentioned earlier that your main writings are about masculinity. Can you tell us a bit about that? What sort of things have you written about before in relation to masculinity?
Yeah, okay. So many years after the undergrad degree, I did a bit of traveling and I went off and I worked in all sorts of different jobs, sales jobs, retail work. I was a manager in Tesco for a while, did a bit of traveling. And then I thought, well, I want to do something with my degree and I want to kind of teach sociology because I quite like that. I started teaching in a working class college, in a working class area of South Wales, but similar to where I grew up, but not the same community. Started teaching A-level sociology, AS level. And I started realizing that most of the classes I was teaching were all female dominated, talking 10, 12 students and 10 or 12 female students. So I wondered where the boys were. And I started to think about my own journey. And I thought, well, there's lots of this masculinity literature out there on how men have altered, going back to the probably mid-noughties, so 2006, 7, 8, but nothing on men in South Wales in terms of the masculinities literature. So I put a proposal together to do a PhD with some people at Cardiff University, and I was lucky enough to get the funding. And so I started that in 2008, and I spent the next 2.5 years doing ethnographic fieldwork in a community which I call Cwm Dyffryn, which was in the South Wales Valleys. So the work was really influenced by Paul Willis, which was something I'd read as an undergrad, and I'd read it more as a PhD student. And I realized that idea that working class men have a degree of agency, although that degree of agency, that degree of free will is shaped by the situation you're in. I wanted to kind of investigate that more. And as I mentioned earlier, my own biographies, so I kind of could draw on some of that in the way I conducted that study. So I was able to sort of adopt certain practices to engage in some young men in the school that I started out in, and to drop some elements of that. And that was where I really came across Irving Goffman's work, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. So that blended with Connell's work really gave me an insight into masculinity, and it gave me an insight into what was going on in this community. And I was then able to spend lots of time with different groups of young men within that one cohort in school. So I spent, as I said, 2.5 years with a group of young men. From the time they were just finishing their GCSEs, roughly about the age of 16, right through to when some of them finished their A-levels and went on. So I was able to go out from the schools into the local colleges to witness some of the young men participating in different vocational courses. So how that helped shape their masculinity in different ways. So one young man did equine studies. One young man did motor vehicle studies, and then another young man did an apprenticeship with a electrical company. So lots of different routes into education and lots of different masculinities, I guess, being performed there. But what was important, and a lot of the literature, Paul Willis didn't really do this, and a lot of other studies with men that tend to focus on one aspect of their lives. So I realized that if I was going to capture and do a really rigorous ethnographic piece of work, participant observation, that work where you go out, and it'd have to go beyond the school gates. So I spent time in pubs and cars and restaurants and cafes and cinemas and takeaways, parks, different workplaces, anywhere where these young men would invite me into their lives. And it's hard now, thinking back 10 or 12 years ago from when they started as a senior lecturer at a university, thinking that I was given that access and that those young men trusted me, because they weren't fools. They didn't think I was a teacher. They didn't, they knew that I was just this student from a university. They didn't, people always, and I've had criticisms of it, they say, well, how do you know that the young man wanted you? You ever tried to hang out with a group of 18-year-old lads who don't want you around? They certainly won't invite you to the pub, and they certainly won't invite you to different places. And looking back on it now, I think the key thing was to be as friendly to one group as with another, so try and mix with as many people as I could in that year group. 35 young men started year 13, which is the final year of A-levels. It was about 150 in year 11. And out of those 35, 32 finished school, so they got some sort of qualification. So there was quite a lot of young men to sort of keep track of. Some I got on better with than others. Some of them probably won't even remember me. Others I'm still quite close with now. Over social media, it's a wonderful tool to keep in touch with people's lives. And sadly, one of them died. He died in a car crash on his way to work one morning. So that was quite sobering, because that's one of the consequences of masculinity is recklessness. Yeah. And driving very fast is one way that young men tend to kind of think they can, they live forever and they'll prove their masculinity, I guess. Yeah. So that was quite upsetting. That was not long after the end of fieldwork. So going to a funeral with lots of 17, 18-year-old boys was very tough. And I sort of wrote a little bit about that at the time, but I didn't do anything with it. And then when I published the book many years later, which is a homage to Paul Willis, I guess, I opened with that story. That the prologue is the day I was in the church with the young men, and that sort of begins the journey, so the reader can have a glimpse of these young lives. And I take them through their lives of 2 years in that book. So that was out in 2015.
Yeah.
Since then, my other work has looked at the impact of role models, or male role models, or positive figures in young men's lives. It was a project with the Open University in Action for Children. And I've done some other research in Canada, in higher education, and how men from working class backgrounds, or what at the time I called first in the families, to go to university. Because there's a slightly different relationship to social class in Canada to Britain. And that was done in British Columbia, in Vancouver. I spent 6 months doing that. And that was kind of something which took the same types of young men that would have been in the school study. And then last year I did a project with some young parents who were in a family intervention project. So those are the young parents who were most at risk of losing their children.
Yeah.
And what was interesting there, and this shows how long I've been doing masculinity research, now doing it for 12 years, is how the different young men talk. Once they were given the platform to do that, they were able to talk about what it means to be a young man, whereas I don't think, well, I know when I started the research in 2008, the young men wouldn't have talked about it.
Masculinity seems to be under more scrutiny than ever, doesn't it? I was interested to know your kind of views on it, because on one side there seems to be quite an effort to try and change masculinity to be a better man, but on the other side there's a lot of people saying that masculinity is kind of under attack. The term toxic masculinity is thrown around quite a lot as well. What's your kind of view on where masculinity sits at the moment?
Well, there's two things with the concept of toxic masculinity. I think the idea that masculinity itself is toxic is misleading, because there are multiple types of masculinity. And masculinities is plural. There's masculinities. So of course there are toxic, and I also take masculinity to be a performance of multiple acts.
Yeah.
It's things that we do in everyday situations and global situations. So I think there are some versions of masculinity which are toxic. I think it's toxic for men and toxic for people around men, their partners, their children. But in the whole debate around it, it seems to have been, and it's very difficult to have this nuanced debate. I mean, the whole concept, hegemonic masculinity, the average day person, I mean, that's a concept which is, how do you, basically just talking about dominant men, I guess. Yeah. Even I'm not doing a very good job of it here, but it's something which isn't in everyday language. So I do think that toxic masculinity has a place to play, but we haven't, as sociologists, I guess, or men and masculinity scholars, we haven't done a very good job at taking that apart and actually saying that, well, some practices of masculinity are harmful and others aren't. We don't often talk about the positive sides of masculinity.
That's what worries me.
We don't talk much about friendship. We don't talk about male groups, that idea of, and the problem is when you talk about male bonding, you have these ideas of going off in the woods and doing things, or you have these ideas of doing possibly toxic practices like drinking a lot with your mates or going out. And so sometimes there's a phrase, this straitjacket of masculinity, this mask that men kind of feel they often have to put on. There are different theories emerging in the scholarly literature now about men being more open than their past, and I'm kind of open. Of course, masculinity's changed. My grandfather changed as he grew older. He was a coal miner, and when he was in his 70s, he was doing the dishes and hanging out, washing out on the line. He wouldn't have done that when he was in his 20s. So masculinity does change, and practices change.
Yeah,
I think we also have to be conscious that men still operate the dominant position in society. We still have a patriarchal world. I teach I teach a second year gender studies module, and I'm very careful when I teach that module to say that as a man teaching about feminism, for political reasons, I'm not quite sure I never define myself as a feminist.
Yeah.
I say I'm a pro-feminist or feminist-inspired male, or I'm a feminist ally. But some feminists would argue that you can't be a feminist if you've benefited from the trappings of patriarchy, which as a white man, even if I'm from a working class background, I have, haven't I? I've got to be honest about that. I always start my classes by saying that. I'm luckier than some. But then I also think that I'm able to draw on some aspects of my background, which I probably might have more in common with some marginalised women than middle class or upper class women. I don't know.
So, Mike, where can people read more about your ideas of masculinity in the book that you mentioned as well?
So, From Labouring to Learning, Working Class Masculinities, Education and Deindustrialisation is a Palgrave book. It's available from all good online bookstores, and it's in paperback at the moment. And I had a nice email last week asking me if I could have it translated into Japanese.
Oh, wow.
Somebody in Japan wants, a publisher in Japan would like to publish it, which was a huge honour. So if you speak Japanese, it might be out in Japan soon.
Right. Thank you. That's going to be the end of part one. In part two, we're going to talk about your current project, the Corona Diaries. Welcome back to part two. I'm talking to Dr. Mike Ward from Swansea University. Mike, thanks very much for your input on what you've previously done. Let's talk about what you're currently doing, the Coronavirus Diaries. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So, what an odd time we're in. The last 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the lockdown, we were still teaching, and I was talking to my sociology, our first year students, and we were talking about was the coronavirus or COVID-19, which I'm roughly about the time we started calling it that as well. I said, well, is this just a moral panic? So we had this big conversation, about 20 of us talking about it being a moral panic, and if it was just like flu, and why we were all so worried, and and as the weeks went on and things got more and more serious, the students kind of were like, I don't think it is anymore. I was like, no, I don't think it is. But, keep your eyes peeled. And then, of course, we didn't see each other again. So I sent a lot of emails saying, you're now living in a massive breaching experiment. So Bloomer, American sociologist, talks about breaching experiments. We did breaching experiments on people where you would change things. So you would tell students to go home and treat your house like a hotel. Just to kind of see what the reaction would be. And some sociologists have been writing about the coronavirus as a huge breaching experiment, which is turning society upside down. It's being made and remade around us. So about the 18th, 19th of March, I thought, gosh, this is a real opportunity here to kind of, maybe try and do something on this. And as the week went by and the lockdown came into force and everything changed, I kind of thought, oh, this could be my way of contributing to something. I'm not an essential worker. I'm not particularly well. I had an operation cancelled on the NHS because which I'd been waiting for 6 months. So I kind of felt like I needed to do something with my skills at this time. So I came up with this idea that it would be good if we could get people to document their experiences. And thinking back to the Second World War, when before, during, and after the war, the mass observation diaries study, people recorded their experiences, and they had about 500 people which kept up their diaries, for roughly from about 1937. And there is still a mass observation archive now, which is held at the University of Sussex, and they're currently taking recruiting for this. But I thought it would be a really good opportunity for me to kind of, just start a small project. So Corona Diaries, exploring the everyday experiences of a global pandemic, was launched roughly around 28th of March. The problem with this whole thing is it all blurs into one. I mean, it's a Tuesday afternoon, but it could be Friday night. Everything just feels similar. So I just had this idea that I could start a project, get some people to write about it, or maybe perhaps they could record it in other ways. So I decided that people would perhaps send in video diaries or TikToks, which I'd never heard about, memes, Facebook or other social media posts. So anything that could be a contemporary recording as well. So my ethics committee at Swansea were really, really supportive, and my colleagues put it through in a week. I've had lots of comments on Twitter and through other people. How did they work so quickly? They saw the value in the project, and they really wanted to support me, and we worked together. And within a week of it being submitted, it was passed with ethical approval, and I had lots of support. So I put it out there on Twitter and other networks and other people that I know. A huge response. At the present, I've had over 300 inquiries about the study, which for a lone researcher is an awful lot of admin.
Yeah.
And as of this morning, I've now got 154 consent forms in. So that's basically by participants. I've had 60 entries for March and 85 entries for April. So I'm collecting entries over 6 months and in batches. So people send me whatever material they might have at the end of each month. And so far, some of the accounts have been really moving in terms of issues that they're writing about or recording, or they've been quite funny, or they've been a bit of both. So there's all sorts of things.
And it was picked up by the BBC, wasn't it? You had an article on there.
Yeah, it was. It's got the most media coverage of any research I've ever done. I got on BBC. It was a BBC News on Tuesday, the 14th of April, on the radio that day, and also it was on the BBC website. Now, what that did was it brought in an awful lot of new people who possibly weren't even on Twitter or weren't even in the UK. So it spread the global reach. So the study's now become a study of around 12 countries. So Canada, America, Australia, Switzerland, France, all 4 countries of the UK. Spain, Italy, sorry. So it's just huge. And then from there, then I did 3 radio interviews on Radio Wales, which was an experience, and I kind of picked up even more. And some people who haven't got the internet were listening to the radio, and then they've got their granddaughters to email me.
Yeah.
And then so I could send some information out. So of course, it's one of them things which is reactionary. So I haven't really got time to go out and put up posters everywhere because I'm not really supposed to leave the house for anything other than essential shopping, and so it's been quite difficult in that regard. So in terms of getting 150 people from all across the world to send me things and different varieties, it's been wonderful.
Sorry, I know you're particularly interested in generational differences, aren't you, between how people are coping with lockdown? What's your findings from that?
So far we've got a huge difference, obviously, in terms of technological ability,
Yeah.
which I guess you could kind of understand before you would even do a study like this. But what's been really interesting from the accounts I've had back is how the older generation really embraced technology, almost out of a necessity. And this has really encouraged people, given people more confidence, bizarrely, to engage with things like Zoom or WhatsApp chat. And one person typed up their diary, their handwritten diary, because they were given a tablet or a laptop, sorry, and they really liked doing that because they hadn't typed for many years.
Yeah.
So it's given people something which I didn't think they would. But one of the other sort of side findings, I guess, has been that out of those 153 signed consent forms, there's only about 30 men who got the forms back to me. So there's a huge gender split. Now, I thought with the different versions of documentation, with the jokes, with the memes, with the TikToks, with all the different things that people could submit, just some people are sending me a PDF of their Facebook statuses.
Yeah.
I thought that might encourage more men to get involved, but it hasn't. So that's been an interesting consequence of this.
I wonder if that comes back to what you're saying about masculinity. Is it stoicism or something like that? Is that what men are looking for, solutions or something, rather than actually considering?
I think you've probably got it there. I mean, we know men are less likely to talk about their thoughts, their feelings. Mental health is a huge issue, especially in younger men. But I didn't think it would be as stark in this because of the different varieties of things. I thought blokes would be sending me jokes or something.
Yeah.
But they're not. It's so if there's any men listening to this out there and you want to get involved, please do. We've got a website, which is corona-diaries.co.uk. Please get in touch. It's not too late. The study is going to go until September, and I'm going to have people to submit things at the end of every month. And I've written two blog posts, one on transforming society, where you can read about some of the findings, and another one on the British Sociological blog about the study as well. I've got another piece coming out shortly in the conversation, and that should sort of summarize some of the stories in a bit more. But I'm still looking for people. I'm not turning anyone away. I am only a solo researcher, so I'm not reading everything straight away because I've got a stack of things to read. But I had a really nice handwritten letter in this morning, and a handwritten account of an 87-year-old woman. By the way, my youngest participant's 10, and the oldest is 87. The other 10-year-old's mother asked me if she could join, and I said, well, that'd be wonderful. So we've got a huge generation gap. But this letter that came in this morning made me really realize that this isn't just a research project. It's a study which is helping people to be able to process some of this. And I guess the byproduct is that people are writing now when they wouldn't normally have done that. And that also means that that's enabling them to kind of have a bit of a routine a day, but also to process some of it as it goes along. The lady who sent me this letter this morning, I actually felt quite emotional because I had some sort of connection to somebody rather than just emails or posts.
Yeah.
I feel like social media posts. I feel like this person wrote this because of the study, and it's helped her process what's going on. Which is yeah, sure, yeah. It's only it's a very short letter with a 20-page diary, which will take me a while, but yeah. It was dated the 2nd of May 2020. Dear Dr. Ward, I have enclosed my diary for a part of April 2020, where I am concerned that in parts my handwriting could be challenging. I'm here for clarification. You have the only copy, but please do let me know if there's nothing you can read. I was in the process of updating my equipment when the world was paused, so it's all back to pen and paper. I was upset with my doctor, so I've gone into this in a bit of detail in the diary. But I am aware this is not the face of the NHS, but it is what happened when it happened, and it is now documented. I've also kept the children's cards. This is keeping me going. I also have copies and cards of support that people are supporting me from my chapel. I feel locked out of the world, but these are helping me get through. This study is also helping me do that. I feel like you've released something in me which I haven't had a chance to do for a long time. Finally, I didn't expect drama, But with all my support stopped overnight, things like this do happen. Events, dear boy, events. My own writing is a little bit wobbly when I have my tremors. But the wobbles keep me going. Good luck with it.
That's fantastic. There's something special about pen and paper, isn't there?
It really is.
Yeah, just typing a message or forwarding on a meme, to pick up pen and paper. There's something very poignant about that.
And somebody who's 87, she writes a little bit about her Parkinson's condition. Her husband's got dementia. So you feel like, I don't know, I feel more of a connection to this person than I do to lots of other people, because even with the photos, you see a photo of someone, but they're not, I don't know. It's such So going back to the Second World War, when all the diaries were written then, I guess that you put more of yourself into writing. I'm not a linguist, and I'm sure people talk about the context of what's in these diaries, I guess. And I realise already I've had some criticisms from people that they're saying, well, that diaries can all be made up and it's not real research. I actually had a researcher tell me that it wasn't research, a quantitative research. But I mean, I think it's an extraordinary time. I think for this person who wrote that and sent me that in the post, I just think it's a real recording of what's going on. And my skills as a sociologist can't be put to use now. Then what's the point? Yeah. I mean, I've had conversations with 2 different publishers about books from this, and I'm really pressing for this concept of what I would say is kind of like a double album. So one which would be people's stories, that my mum might buy in Asda's or Tesco or something, something in a bookshop with they'll actually sell something. But it would also then be an academic book. So it could be both sides to it. And I'm in conversation with 2 different publishers about that. So there will be something. Goodness, there will be something out of this, but depends which one comes first, I guess.
No, I was going to ask you. Could you just remind us where people can follow the blogs again? So if they do want to get in touch.
Yeah, so we've got a website which is called corona-diaries.co.uk. If someone's interested in joining, you can always email me. It's m.r.m.ward@swansea.ac.uk. And there are, as I've said, I've written 2 blog pieces for other blogs. So one blog post that I've written for an online blog called Transforming Society talks a little about the class and gender dynamics of this. And then there's another piece on the British Sociological website, which is also about the study and the consequences of documenting people's life.
Great, thank you. And people can follow you on Twitter as well?
They can, yes. MRM Ward PhD. And I've posted something today about these, actually, so if you want to see what's going on there. But like I say, I'm open to suggestions, and people want to get involved, please let me know. More the merrier.
And more men.
Yes, more men, please.
Thank you very much for your time today, Mike. That's really fantastic.
Okay, thanks.
Best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.